Gallatin County, Montana Territory. July 1887. The hammer came down with a sound that echoed across the valley like a heartbeat. Then again, and again, each strike driving a nail into timber that had no business being where it was. Elsa Thornburg wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of sawdust across her skin. She was 19 years old, 5 feet 4 inches of determination, wrapped in a faded blue dress that had belonged to her mother. Her blonde hair, pulled back in a practical braid, had come loose hours ago. She did not stop to fix it. She had more important things to do. The wall she was building stood exactly 2 feet inside another wall. A complete structure within a complete structure. A cabin wearing another cabin like a coat. From the road below, 3 men on horseback had stopped to watch. They had been watching for the better part of an hour, their horses shifting restlessly beneath them, their faces wearing expressions that ranged from confusion to amusement to something approaching pity. The tallest of the 3, a rancher named Cornelius Webb, finally spoke. "What in God's name is that girl doing?" His companion, a younger man who worked at the general store in Bozeman, shook his head slowly. "Building 2 cabins where one would do, from the looks of it. That's the Thornburg girl, isn't it? The one whose folks died in the mine collapse?" "The same. She's been at it for 3 weeks now. Whole valley's talking about it." The third man, older than the others with a gray beard that reached his chest, made a sound that was half laugh and half sigh. "Talking about how she's lost her mind, more like. That gap between those walls serves no purpose except to waste good lumber." Up on the building site, Elsa heard none of this. Or perhaps she heard all of it and simply chose not to care. She positioned another board, held it steady with her left hand, and drove the nail home with 3 precise strikes. The gap was exactly 24 inches wide. She had measured it 17 times to be certain. 24 inches of empty space that would mean the difference between life and death when winter came. She knew this the way she knew her own name, the way she knew the color of her mother's eyes, the way she knew that her father had been right about everything that mattered. Her father had taught her about gaps, about the power of nothing, about how empty space properly arranged could be worth more than all the solid timber in Montana. But her father was dead now. Buried somewhere beneath 1,000 tons of rock in a copper mine in Butte, his body never recovered.
What in God's name is that girl doing? Building 2 cabins where one would do!
That gap serves no purpose except to waste good lumber.
Wisdom living on only in the memory of a 19-year-old girl that the whole valley had decided was crazy. Elsa drove another nail, and another, and another. Let them watch. Let them whisper. Let them shake their heads and place their bets on her failure. Winter would prove her right. Winter always told the truth. The memory came to her that night, as it always did when her hands were too tired to work and her mind was too awake to sleep. Gothenburg, Sweden, 1878. She was 10 years old, small for her age, with the same blonde braids she wore now, and a curiosity that her mother called exhausting and her father called the finest gift God ever gave a child. The ice house rose from the harbor like a wooden fortress, its walls dark with age and salt spray. Her father, Anders Thornburg, stood inside with his hand pressed against the interior surface, his eyes bright with the particular joy he reserved for teaching. "Feel this," he said, guiding her small hand to the wood. "What do you notice?" The wall was cold, so cold it almost burned. Outside, the Swedish summer had pushed temperatures into the 70s. Inside, the ice remained frozen in great blocks, preserved for the fishermen who would need it for months to come. "It's cold, Papa." "It's cold because of the gap." He led her to the space between the inner and outer walls, a corridor of stillness just wide enough for a man to walk through. "Do you feel the air in here?" She felt it. Or rather, she felt the absence of feeling. The air was not warm. The air was not cold. The air was simply there, unmoving, like a held breath. "Still air doesn't conduct heat," her father explained. "It doesn't carry warmth from one place to another. It just sits there, doing nothing, and that nothing is the most powerful insulation in the world." "Why doesn't everyone build this way, then?" Her father smiled, the way he always smiled when she asked the right question. "Because people trust what they can see and touch. They think thick walls mean warmth. Solid construction means protection. They build heavier and heavier, and they never stop to consider that the gap, the empty space, the thing that looks like nothing, might be worth more than everything surrounding it." "But you know better." "I know differently. That's not always the same thing." He knelt down to meet her eyes. "Remember this, Elsa. When everyone tells you that you're wrong, when every voice in the world insists that the old way is the only way, ask yourself one question. Have they tested it? Have they built both kinds and measured the difference? Or are they just repeating what their fathers told them and their fathers before that? And if they haven't tested it, then their certainty is just tradition dressed up in confidence. And tradition, however comforting, doesn't make itself true just because people believe it." 9 years later, in a half-built cabin in Montana, Elsa whispered those words into the darkness like a prayer. Her father had been right about ice houses. 17 of them he had built along the Swedish coast, each one using the double wall principle, each one keeping ice frozen through August, while competitors with solid walls watched their inventory melt away by
I hate this cabin. I hate those walls. You're gonna get us killed with your stupid gap and your stupid ice house stories.
Papa is dead.
June. If the principle worked to keep cold in, it had to work to keep cold out. Physics did not care about direction. Physics did not care about tradition. Physics only cared about what was true. And the truth was that her family had nearly died last winter. The winter of 1886 to 1887 had been a lesson written in suffering. Elsa and Niels had been alone in the old cabin, their parents gone to work in the Butte copper mines since spring. "Just until we save enough for a real start," their mother had said, pressing a kiss to Elsa's forehead. "We'll be back before the first snow. I promise." The first snow came in early October. Their parents did not come with it. By November, Elsa understood that something was wrong. By December, when the letter finally arrived, she understood that something was broken beyond repair. The letter was from a man named Harrison, a foreman at the Lexington mine. The words were formal and cold, delivering devastation in the clipped language of bureaucracy. A tunnel collapse on September 14th. 12 men lost. Anders and Marit Thornburg among them. No bodies recovered. Compensation of $47 enclosed. $47. The price of 2 lives, a lifetime of memories, and everything Elsa had ever believed about the fairness of the world. She did not cry when she read the letter. She could not afford to cry. Niels was watching her with eyes that begged for reassurance, for someone to tell him that everything would be all right, that their parents were coming home, that this was all some terrible mistake. Elsa gave him none of those things. She gave him the only thing she had left to give. "We're going to survive this," she said. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to survive." The winter that followed tested every word of that promise. The old cabin had been built by a previous homesteader, a man who understood Montana about as well as Elsa understood the surface of the moon. Its walls were 8 inches of solid timber, chinked with mud and moss, and it leaked heat like a sieve leaks water. The first week of true cold, when temperatures dropped to 20 below, Elsa learned something that every settler in the territory knew, but no one had thought to mention to an 18-year-old girl suddenly responsible for a 12-year-old boy. Solid walls don't stop cold. They conduct it. She would press her palm against the interior logs and feel the chill radiating inward, feel the warmth being pulled out of the cabin by 8 inches of wood that might as well have been 8 inches of metal for all the insulation they provided. She burned everything, every stick of wood she could find, every piece of furniture they could spare, every scrap of anything that would catch fire. The stove roared day and night, and still the cabin temperature rarely climbed above 45 degrees. Niels got sick the second week of January. It started with a cough. Just a small thing, barely noticeable, the kind of cough that would clear up on its own in a day or two. That's what Elsa told herself. That's what she needed to believe. By the 3rd day, the cough had become a rattle. By the 5th day, Niels was burning with fever, his breath coming in shallow gasps, his lips tinted blue from lack of oxygen. Elsa did not sleep for 6 days. She held him through the worst of it, wrapped in every blanket they owned, her body heat adding what little it could to the failing effort of the stove. She fed him broth when he would take it, and snow water when he would not. She talked to him through the long nights, telling him stories of Sweden, of the ocean, of the ice houses their father used to build. On the 7th day, the fever broke. Niels survived. Barely. But in the long nights of his recovery, as Elsa sat awake watching his chest rise and fall, she made a promise to herself and to the memory of their father. Never again. She would build a cabin the way Anders Thornberg had built ice houses. 2 walls with a gap between them. Dead air. Still air. Air that would trap heat the way it had once trapped cold. She would build a cabin that kept her family warm, or she would die trying. Construction began in July 1887, 10 months after her parents' death. Elsa had spent the spring preparing.
I know what it's like to have the whole world tell you you're wrong. Keep building your cabin. Eventually, they'll all see.
Harvesting lumber, studying her memories of her father's ice houses, drawing plans on scraps of paper and erasing them and drawing them again until she had something she believed would work. The outer shell went up first. 24 feet by 18 feet, framed with 8-inch logs from a stand of lodgepole pine along the Gallatin River. Standard construction, tight joints, a roof pitched steep enough to shed Montana snow. Anyone passing by would see nothing unusual, just a cabin slightly larger than most. The unusual part came next. 2 feet inside the outer walls, Elsa began framing a second complete structure. 20 feet by 14 feet, with its own floor joists, its own wall studs, its own ceiling beams. The inner cabin would not touch the outer cabin anywhere. It would stand independent, separated by 24 inches of empty space on all sides, above and below. A box within a box, a house within a house. Her father's ice house principle, applied in reverse. That was when the trouble started. Jasper Caldwell arrived on the 4th day of the inner framing. He was 55 years old, built like a boulder, with a white beard that failed to soften the hardness of his jaw and eyes that had seen more than they'd ever chosen to share. He had come to the Gallatin Valley in 1862, fought for the Union Army as an engineer, built bridges that held 10,000 pounds and fortifications that stopped Confederate artillery. He knew about building. He knew it the way Elsa knew about ice houses, which was to say he knew it in his bones. He dismounted his horse and walked between the two wall frames, measuring the gap with eyes that missed nothing. For a long moment, he said nothing at all. Then he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, carrying no humor, a laugh of disbelief, a laugh of condemnation. Miss Thornburg. He said her name the way a judge might say a verdict. What exactly am I looking at? My cabin, Mr. Caldwell. Your cabin. He knocked his knuckles against the outer frame, then the inner. You've built two of them, one inside the other. That's correct. With a gap between that serves no purpose except to waste lumber. The gap is the purpose. Caldwell walked a slow circle around the structure, his boots leaving prints in the sawdust. Other settlers had gathered by now, drawn by the spectacle of the most respected man in the valley confronting the orphan girl who had clearly lost her mind. I've been building for 35 years, Caldwell said, his voice pitched to Carrie. I've engineered structures that held armies, and I'm telling you right now, Miss Thornburg, that gap is the most useless thing I've ever seen a person frame. My father built ice houses in Sweden, double walls with air gaps. The ice stayed frozen through August. Ice isn't heat, cold isn't warm. Whatever worked for your father's fish boxes has nothing to do with keeping a family alive in Montana. The physics is the same. The physics. Caldwell turned to face the gathered crowd, his expression shifting from irritation to something that looked almost like concern. Do you hear this? This girl, this child, thinks she understands physics better than every builder in the territory. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Elsa felt it like a slap, but did not flinch. Caldwell stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I know you've been through something terrible. Losing your parents that way. Being left alone with a boy to raise. That kind of loss can break a mind. My mind is not broken. Then explain to me, please, how you plan to heat two structures instead of one. Because that's what you've built here. Two cabins. Double the surface area. Double the heat loss. You'll burn through your wood supply by January and freeze to death by February. The inner cabin doesn't face the cold. It faces the gap. The gap faces the cold. The gap is still air. Still air doesn't conduct heat. It just sits there, insulating, protecting. My family won't be heating against 40 below zero. We'll be heating against whatever temperature the gap maintains. 50 degrees, maybe 55. Caldwell stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly, the way a man might shake his head at a stubborn child who refused to accept that fire was hot. I'm going to do you a kindness, Miss Thornburg. I'm going to pretend this conversation never happened. You tear out that inner frame, use the lumber to reinforce your outer walls, and build yourself a proper cabin. I'll even help you do it, if you'll accept help from a man who knows what he's talking about. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Caldwell. I decline. Something changed in his eyes then. The concern drained away, replaced by a coldness that matched the Montana winters he claimed to understand so well. Suit yourself. He turned back to his horse. When January comes and your family freezes same as everyone else, except you've spent twice the money getting there, you'll understand what the rest of us already know. He mounted and looked down at her one final time. That boy of yours deserves better than a sister who builds houses based on fairy tales about Swedish fish boxes. He rode away without looking back. By evening, half the valley knew about the Thornburg girl building 2 cabins where one would do. By the following week, a betting pool had appeared at Prudence Whitfield's general store. $47 in the pot. Most of it wagered on Elsa tearing out the inner walls before the first snow. A few darker bets suggested the whole structure would collapse under its own unnecessary weight. The mockery was relentless, constant, creative in its cruelty. Building a cabin to match her mind, one rancher joked. Empty space where sense should be. Poor things trying to impress a father who can't see it from 6 feet under. Orphan madness. Seen it before. The mind breaks when it loses too much too fast. Elsa bore it all with a silence that some mistook for shame and others mistook for weakness. It was neither. It was focus. It was the particular kind of concentration that allows a person to keep hammering when every voice in the world is telling them to stop. But the cruelest blow came not from strangers. It came from the one place Elsa had hoped to find understanding. Gunnar Olsson was 48 years old, a Swedish farmer who had come to Montana in 1872 and spent 15 years building a reputation as a sensible, hard-working immigrant who
51 degrees, in the gap. While outside it was 40 below. I was wrong. I was completely, utterly wrong.
Understood American ways. He had a wife, 3 grown sons, and a farm that produced enough wheat to sell at profit in Bozeman. He was, in every way that mattered, a success story. He was also the only other Swedish person in the Gallatin Valley. Elsa found him after church on a Sunday in late August, her heart carrying the kind of hope that only the truly desperate can carry. "Mr. Olsson," she said, catching him before he could reach his wagon. "I was wondering if I might speak with you." He looked at her the way one might look at a stray dog that had wandered too close to the dinner table. "Make it quick. You know about the cabin I'm building, the double walls. Everyone knows about your cabin, Miss Thornburg. My father built ice houses in Gothenburg, the same principle, 2 walls with an air gap. The ice stayed frozen all summer because the still air prevented heat transfer. I thought, since you're from Sweden too, you might understand. You might have seen—" "Stop!" The word cut through her explanation like a knife through butter. Olsson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss that somehow felt louder than a shout. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to the rest of us? I'm building a cabin. You're making us all look like fools." His face had reddened, a vein pulsing in his temple. "The Americans already think Scandinavians are strange, different. We talk funny, we cook funny, we do things they don't understand. I've spent 15 years proving that we're just like them. Sensible, practical, normal. I don't see what that has to do with you're building a cabin that the whole valley calls crazy, and you're doing it while speaking English with the same accent your father spoke with, the same accent I speak with. When you fail, and you will fail, people won't say Elsa Thornburg built poorly. They'll say the Swedes don't know how to build. All of us will pay for your arrogance. It's not arrogance, it's physics. It's stupidity dressed up in foreign words." Olsson grabbed her arm, his grip firm enough to leave bruises. "Tear down those inner walls. Build like an American. Stop embarrassing your people." "My father, your father is dead. His ideas died with him. And if you don't accept that soon, you and your brother will follow him into the ground." He released her arm and walked away without another word. Elsa stood alone in the churchyard, surrounded by families heading home for Sunday dinner, and understood for the first time the true depth of her isolation. She had no family except a 13-year-old brother who was starting to doubt her. She had no friends. She had no community. She had nothing but a half-built cabin that everyone said would kill her, and a promise she had made to herself in the darkest hours of last winter. The whole Gallatin Valley had bet against her. The only other Swedish person in the territory had rejected her, and now she had to prove them all wrong. Not for pride, not for vindication, but for Niels, for survival, for the simple, desperate hope that winter would not take from her the only family she had left. If you're watching this video, I want you to take a moment to think about what Elsa was facing. 19 years old, parents dead, entire community against her. The only person she has left in the world is her 13-year-old brother, and she's about to gamble both their lives on a principle she learned from a father she'll never see again. What would you do in her position? Would you have the courage to keep building? To trust what you know is true, even when everyone says you're wrong? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And subscribe if you want to find out what happened when Montana's deadliest winter tested Elsa's double-walled cabin against every solid-wall cabin in the valley. Because what happened next changed everything. October 1887. The betting pool at Prudence Whitfield's general store had grown to $74. Jasper Caldwell himself had added 10, along with a prediction he shared with anyone who would listen. That gap will be her grave. Come January, she'll be heating 2 structures instead of 1. Outer walls bleeding warmth into the gap. Inner walls bleeding warmth into the living space. Double the surface area means double the heat loss. The girl's built herself a machine for burning money and killing children. The words traveled through the valley faster than fever. By the time they reached Elsa's ears, they had multiplied and mutated, becoming darker with each retelling. Caldwell says the brother will be dead by Christmas. I heard the whole structure's going to collapse under snow load. Someone ought to do something. Take that boy away from her before she gets him killed. That last whisper was the one that planted a seed in Jasper Caldwell's mind, a seed that would grow into something far more dangerous than mockery. But that came later. First came the moving day. Elsa and Niels moved into the new cabin on September 15th, 1 year to the day after their parents died in the mine collapse. The timing was not coincidental. This is our new beginning, Elsa told her brother as they carried their few possessions through the outer door, across the gap, and through the inner door. This is where we start living, instead of just surviving. Niels said nothing. He had been saying less and less lately, his eyes carrying a wariness that made him look older than 13. He had seen the crowds gathering to watch his sister work. He had heard the whispers. He had been in school when the other children repeated what their parents said at dinner tables. Miss Lindstrom asked why you built 2 walls, he said that night, his voice flat in the darkness of their new bedroom. I didn't know what to tell her. What did you want to tell her? I wanted to tell her you know what you're doing, that Papa taught you about ice houses and still air and all of that. But when I tried to explain it, everyone laughed. Let them laugh. They'll stop laughing when winter comes. What if they're right? The question hung in the air between them, heavier than all the timber Elsa had lifted that summer. They're not right. But what if they are? What if the gap doesn't work here the way it worked in Sweden? What if we freeze and everyone says we told you so over our graves? Then at least we'll have frozen trying something different instead of freezing doing the same thing that killed the Hendersons' baby last January and gave old Mr. Pearson frostbite so bad they had to take 3 of his fingers. Niels was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, younger, more like the boy he used to be. I miss Mama and Papa. I know, I miss them too. Do you think they can see us? Do you think they know what you're building? Elsa stared at the ceiling, at the gap above it where her father's principle lived and breathed and waited to prove itself. I think, she said slowly, that if Papa can see us, he's proud. And if Mama can see us, she's worried. Just like when they were alive. Niels almost laughed. Almost. It was enough. The first hard frost came on October 3rd. Elsa was awake before dawn, as she was every morning now. She lit a lantern and walked into the gap, that 24-inch corridor of stillness that wrapped around her living space like an embrace. She carried a thermometer that had cost her almost a week's wages. The mercury told a story that made her heart sing. Outside temperature, 19 degrees. Gap temperature, 48 degrees. The gap was working, already working. Before she had even begun heating the inner cabin in earnest, the still air was proving her father's principle. She documented everything. Outside temperature, gap temperature, inner cabin temperature, time of measurement, weather conditions, wind direction. Her notebook filled with numbers that meant nothing to anyone except her, and would mean everything to everyone when winter delivered its verdict. But the numbers did not protect her from the other storms gathering on the horizon. The schoolhouse sat 2 miles from the Thornburg homestead, a small wooden building that served 17 children from 7 families. Niels walked there every morning, his breath fogging in the autumn air, his feet carrying him toward a daily ordeal that was becoming harder to bear. The mockery had started subtle. Whispered jokes, meaningful glances, the particular silence that falls over a room when the subject of gossip walks in. By late October, it had become overt. "Hey, Niels!" Tommy Caldwell, Jasper's grandson, was 14 years old, with his grandfather's build and his grandfather's cruelty. "How's your crazy sister's double house? Still standing, or did it fall down yet?" "It's standing fine. My grandpa says it's going to collapse under the snow. Says your sister doesn't know anything about building, and your whole family's touched in the head. Your grandpa's wrong."
I told you to stop embarrassing our people. I was a fool.
You didn't embarrass us, Miss Thornburg. You made us proud.
My grandpa built bridges for the Union Army. What did your papa build? Fish boxes in some foreign country nobody's ever heard of? Laughter erupted from the boys gathered around Tommy. Niels felt his face burn, felt his hands curl into fists, felt the particular helplessness of a child facing a truth he cannot fight. My papa built ice houses. They kept ice frozen all summer. That's why Elsa... Ice houses! More laughter. Hear that, boys? The Thornburgs are fish people. No wonder they smell funny. The teacher, Miss Lindstrom, intervened before it went further. But the damage was done. Every day brought new variations on the same theme. Fish people, crazy Swedes, the girl who built 2 walls. Niels stopped eating lunch with the other children. He stopped raising his hand in class. He stopped talking about his family at all, as if silence might make him invisible, might let him fade into the background until everyone forgot whose brother he was. It did not work. Nothing worked. And somewhere in the accumulating weight of daily humiliation, something inside him began to crack. The breaking came on a November night when the temperature dropped to 15 below and the wind howled like a living thing against the outer walls of Elsa's cabin. Niels had come home from school without speaking. He had eaten dinner without speaking. He had gone to bed without speaking. Elsa recognized the signs, the particular quality of silence that precedes an explosion. She found him in his small bedroom, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. Do you want to talk about it? No. Niels, I said no. She sat down beside him anyway, the way their mother used to sit, patient and present, and unwilling to leave even when leaving was easier. Whatever they said today, it doesn't matter. Words can't hurt us. Only cold can hurt us. And our walls. Your walls! Niels spun to face her, and she saw that his eyes were red, that he had been crying alone in the dark, that the crack inside him had finally broken wide open. They're your walls, your crazy idea, your stupid plan that everyone laughs at. Niels, I hate this cabin. I hate those walls. I hate that you think you know better than everyone just because Papa told you some story about ice. It's not a story. It's physics. It's insane. Everyone says so. Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Olson, Miss Whitfield, everyone. The only person in the whole valley who thinks this is going to work is you. And Papa believed it. Papa is dead. The words exploded out of him like something that had been trapped too long. Papa is dead, and Mama is dead, and we're all alone, and you're going to get us killed with your stupid gap and your stupid ice house, and I hate you. I hate you. He was crying now, huge sobs that racked his thin body. Elsa reached for him, but he pulled away. Don't touch me. You're not Mama. You'll never be Mama. Mama would have listened to people. Mama would have done what made sense. Mama would have kept me safe instead of gambling my life on something everyone says is crazy. I'm trying to keep you safe. That's all I've ever been trying to do. Then why doesn't it feel like it? Why does it feel like you care more about proving Papa right than keeping me alive? Elsa had no answer for that. Or rather, she had an answer. But it was too complicated to explain to a 13-year-old boy who just wanted to stop being different, who just wanted to fit in, who just wanted his parents back, and would settle for a sister who didn't make everything harder than it had to be. Niels grabbed his coat from the hook by his bed. Where are you going? Away from you. Niels, it's 15 below outside. You can't. Mr. Caldwell said I could stay at his place whenever I wanted. He said his door is always open for children whose families can't take care of them properly. The words hit Elsa like a physical blow. Caldwell had been talking to Niels, planting seeds, laying groundwork for something that was becoming clearer by the minute. Niels, please. Don't go. We can talk about this. We can. But he was already gone. The outer door slamming behind him, his footsteps crunching in the snow as he disappeared into the darkness. Elsa stood alone in her cabin, the cabin that everyone said would kill her, the cabin that might have just cost her the only family she had left. She did not cry. She could not afford to cry. Instead, she checked the stove, added another log, and sat down at the table to wait for a brother who might never come back. The knock came not from Niels, but from Maren Hendricks. She was 32 years old, married to Orville Hendricks, the carpenter who had called Elsa's design an insult to the trade. She had soft brown eyes and work-roughened hands, and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile but remembered how to be kind. May I come in? Elsa stepped aside, too surprised to speak. Maren entered through the gap, pausing to look up at the space between the walls. Her expression was unreadable. I brought soup, she said, holding up a covered pot. And bread. And a blanket I don't need. Why? Because you're 19 years old, and you're alone, and it's 15 below outside. Maren set the pot on the table. And because I know what it's like to have the whole world tell you you're wrong. Your husband says my cabin is an insult to his trade. My husband says a lot of things. Maren met her eyes. I don't always agree with him. They sat together at the table, two women from different worlds united by the particular solidarity of those who swim against the current. "I don't understand what you've built here," Marin admitted. "The gap, the double walls, none of it makes sense to me. But I understand that you're trying to protect your brother. That's what mothers do, what sisters do, what anyone who loves a child would do." "He's at Caldwell's tonight. He said he hates me. He's 13. 13-year-olds say things they don't mean." "What if he means it?" Marin was quiet for a moment. "Then you keep loving him anyway. You keep building your cabin. You keep proving to the world that you know what you're doing. And eventually, he'll see. They'll all see. You believe that?" "I believe that you believe it." Marin stood and wrapped the blanket around Elsa's shoulders. "And sometimes that's enough." She left the soup and the bread, and something more valuable than either. She left the knowledge that even in a valley full of mockers, there was one person who saw Elsa as a human being instead of a punchline. It would have to be enough. December brought the lawsuit. Jasper Caldwell filed the papers on December 8th, 2 days after the first significant snow. He submitted them to the Gallatin County District Court with the assistance of a lawyer from Bozeman and the support of 17 signatures from concerned citizens. The petition sought legal guardianship of Niels Thornburg on the following grounds. First, that Elsa Thornburg, being only 19 years of age, lacked the maturity and judgment necessary to serve as guardian for a minor child. Second, that the construction of her residence demonstrated a pattern of irrational behavior indicative of mental instability. Third, that said residence posed a clear and present danger to any child required to inhabit it. Fourth, that the welfare of Niels Thornburg required immediate intervention by responsible adults of the community. The court date was set for February 15th, 1888. 2 months away. 2 months for Elsa to prove that her cabin was safe, that her mind was sound, that she deserved to keep the only family she had left. 2 months for winter to deliver its verdict. Niels returned the following morning, red-faced and shivering from a night in Caldwell's drafty cabin. He did not apologize. Elsa did not ask him to. But when she handed him a cup of hot coffee, he took it. And when she showed him the petition that had arrived by courier, his face went white. "He wants to take me away from you? He wants to try. Can he?" "Only if the court decides I can't take care of you." Elsa sat down across from him. "Niels, I know you're angry. I know you think I'm wrong about all of this. But if I'm going to prove that this cabin works, I need you to be here. I need you to see it. Because in February, when we go before the judge, your testimony is going to matter. What if it doesn't work? Then I'll figure something else out. But I need you to give me a chance to try." Niels looked around the cabin, at the walls that didn't touch, at the gap that everyone called useless, at his sister, who had worked herself raw for months, building something the whole valley said was impossible. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll stay. But if we freeze, I'm going to say I told you so. If we freeze, I'll deserve it." Neither of them froze. Not that month, anyway. But in January, the real test began. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to understand what Elsa was facing. She wasn't just fighting the cold. She was fighting a community that had already decided she was crazy. She was fighting a legal system that wanted to take away her brother. She was fighting the ghost of every builder who ever said that solid walls were the only way. And in a few days, she would be fighting the deadliest winter Montana had ever seen. Subscribe now and let me know in the comments. Do you think Elsa's cabin will survive what's coming? Do you think the gap will hold? Because what happened in January 1888 changed everything. January 9th, 1888. The morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a perfect blue that offered no hint of what was coming. Temperature at sunrise, 4 degrees below zero. Cold, but manageable. The kind of cold that Montana settlers had learned to accept as the price of living in paradise. By noon, the temperature had dropped to 17 below. By sunset, it had reached 29 below. By midnight, the mercury read 41 degrees below zero, and the wind had started to howl. At 41 below, the world changes. Moisture in the air freezes instantly, creating a fog of ice crystals that hangs over the land like a curse. Metal becomes dangerous to touch, burning exposed skin on contact. The air itself becomes an enemy, stealing heat from everything it touches with mechanical precision. A man caught outside without shelter will lose consciousness in 15 minutes. He will be dead in 30. The cold front that descended on the Gallatin Valley that night was a monster. It had formed over the Canadian glaciers and rolled south for 500 miles without losing any of its fury. It hit Montana like a fist and stayed for 11 days. 11 days of temperatures that rarely climbed above 30 below. 11 days of wind that found every crack, every gap, every poorly sealed joint in every cabin in the territory. 11 days that would kill more people than any winter in Montana's history. Across the valley, families entered survival mode. Stoves that normally needed feeding every 4 hours demanded fuel every 90 minutes. Woodpiles that should have lasted until March began disappearing at terrifying rates. The mathematics of winter turned brutal. Burn more or freeze, but burning more meant running out sooner. Jasper Caldwell's cabin, built according to every principle he had defended so confidently, became a battlefield. His 8-inch solid log walls conducted cold inward with ruthless efficiency. Frost formed on the interior surfaces and never melted. His family abandoned the bedrooms entirely, dragging mattresses to the main room and sleeping in shifts to keep the stove fed. By January 14th, Caldwell had burned through half his winter woodpile. His cabin held 41 degrees near the stove and dropped below freezing within 6 feet of any wall. His children wore every piece of clothing they owned, layered until they could barely move. And still they shivered. The first death came on January 12th. Silas Pearson was 67 years old, a bachelor homesteader who had lived alone for 9 winters and expected to live alone for 9 more. He had built his cabin solid, built it tight, built it the way his father had taught him back in Ohio. His woodpile ran out on the 11th. They found him the next morning, frozen in his bed, with his hands folded across his chest. His face peaceful in the way that only the dead can be peaceful. He had known he was dying. He had arranged himself for burial before the end came. The community buried him in a grave they had to dig with pickaxes, the ground frozen solid down to 3 feet. Reverend Morton said words that the wind stole before they reached anyone's ears. Elsa watched from a distance, Niels beside her, both of them thinking the same thought. That could have been us. That could still be us. The second death came 2 days later, and it broke something in everyone who witnessed it. Maren Hendricks had not stopped thinking about Elsa Thornburg since that night in November. Something about the girl stayed with her. The particular stubbornness of her hope. The way she talked about her father's ice houses like they were religious texts. On the morning of January 14th, with the temperature at 38 below and the wind screaming across the valley, Maren gathered a bundle of firewood from her own depleted pile. She wrapped herself in every coat she owned. She told her husband she was going to check on the Thornburg children. Orville begged her not to go. The cold was too dangerous, the distance too far. Let the girl freeze if she was going to freeze. It wasn't their responsibility. Maren went anyway. Elsa found her 30 feet from the outer door. The firewood was still in her arms, clutched against her chest like a child. Her face was peaceful, almost content, as if she had simply decided to lie down for a moment's rest. Ice crystals had formed on her eyelashes, catching the pale January light like tiny diamonds. She had died helping, died trying to bring warmth to a family that the whole valley had abandoned, died because she saw something in Elsa Thornburg that was worth saving. Elsa knelt in the snow beside her, the cold biting through her clothing, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to rage against a god who would take someone so kind and leave so many cruel people walking. But she did not have time for any of that. The cold was immediate. The danger was real. And somewhere in the cabin behind her, Niels was waiting, depending on her to survive. She carried Maren's body to the Hendricks cabin herself. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. The funeral was held on January 16th, in a break between the worst of the wind. Orville Hendricks stood by the grave, his face a mask of grief and rage. When the service ended, he did not disperse with the other mourners. He walked directly to where Elsa stood at the edge of the gathering. "You killed her." The words were quiet, almost calm, which made them worse. "Mr. Hendricks, she died trying to help you, trying to bring firewood to your foolish cabin that everyone said would fail. If you hadn't built that monstrosity, she would have stayed home. She would be alive. I didn't ask her to come. You didn't have to ask. She was kind. Kind people can't help themselves around suffering." His voice cracked, the calm facade beginning to crumble. "And now her kindness is dead, and you're still standing, and everyone is supposed to just accept that as God's will." "I'm so sorry." "Your sorry doesn't bring her back." Orville turned away, then turned back, one final accusation on his lips. "My wife was worth 10 of you, Elsa Thornburg, and she died for nothing, for absolutely nothing." He walked away without looking back. The crowd dispersed in silence. No one met Elsa's eyes. No one offered comfort or understanding. She was alone, branded by a death that she had not caused, but could not escape. That night, in her warm cabin while the valley froze, Elsa sat alone at the table and considered giving up. Let Caldwell have Niels. Let the court call her unfit. Let the whole world believe she was crazy and cruel and responsible for the death of the only person who had shown her kindness. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was wrong about everything. Maybe the gap was just a gap, and the warmth was just luck. And tomorrow the cold would find its way in and finish what it had started. She was still sitting there when dawn came and did not bring the cold she expected. The cabin held 62 degrees. The gap held 51. The stove burned low and steady. Her father's principle was working perfectly. And in 2 days, someone would come to see it for himself. This is the moment everything changes. Elsa has just lost the only friend she had. The whole valley blames her for a death she didn't cause. The court date is a month away, and everyone expects her to fail. But what happens next will turn everything upside down. Subscribe now if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been blamed for something that wasn't your fault? Have you ever had to keep going when everyone wanted you to give up? Because Elsa's story isn't over, not by a long way. January 15th, 1888. The seventh day of the cold. Jasper Caldwell rose before dawn, his joints aching from another night of inadequate warmth. The fire had burned low while he slept, and the cabin temperature had dropped to 34 degrees. His wife lay beneath every blanket they owned, shivering despite the layers. He had not slept well for a week. He had not been warm for longer than that. Something was wrong with his understanding of the world, and the wrongness nagged at him like a splinter too deep to extract. He dressed in the pre-dawn darkness, pulling on layers of wool and leather until he could barely bend his arms. His grandson Tommy watched from the corner where he had made his bed, his young face pinched with cold. "Where are you going, Grandpa?" "To see the Thornburg cabin." "In this cold? It's 40 below out there." "I know what it is. Miss Thornburg's cabin is 2 miles away. You could die." "I could." Caldwell pulled on his heavy coat. "But I need to see it." "See what?" Caldwell paused at the door, considering the question. What did he need to see? The failure he had predicted? The vindication he had wagered on? Or something else entirely? Something that had been whispering at the edges of his certainty for months? "I need to see if I was wrong," he said finally. "And if I was wrong, I need to know what right looks like." He stepped out into the cold before Tommy could ask anything else. In the corner by the cold fireplace, Niels Thornburg sat wrapped in blankets that could not stop his shivering. He had been staying at the Caldwell cabin since the lawsuit, caught between a sister he had screamed at and a stranger who promised to save him from her. He watched through the frost-covered window as Caldwell's horse disappeared into the swirling white. Something cold settled in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. 2 miles. His sister was 2 miles away in a cabin that everyone said would fail, and Caldwell was riding toward her with the look of a man expecting to find a corpse. The memory hit him without warning. Elsa holding him through the fever last winter. Elsa staying awake for 6 days. Elsa's voice in the darkness, telling him stories about Sweden, about ice houses, about their father. Elsa, who had never stopped fighting for him, even when he said he hated her, even when he walked out that door. He remembered the night before he left. She had made him hot cider even though he wouldn't look at her. She had checked his blankets even though he had told her to leave him alone. She had whispered goodnight through his door even though he had not answered. That was who Elsa was. That was who she had always been. And he had left her alone to face the coldest winter in Montana history. Before he could think about what he was doing, Niels threw off the blankets and grabbed his coat. "Boy, what are you doing?" Caldwell's wife called from beneath her pile of covers. "Going home. You can't go out there. It's 38 below." But Niels was already gone, the door slamming behind him, his feet carrying him into the frozen morning. The cold hit him like a wall of knives. His lungs burned with every breath. His eyes watered and the tears froze on his cheeks before they could fall. He could barely see 10 feet in front of him, but he knew the direction. He had walked to his sister's cabin 100 times. His legs screamed at him to stop. His body begged for warmth. But he kept running. Because if Elsa was going to face whatever came next, she was not going to face it alone. The ride took Caldwell nearly an hour. The cold bit through every layer he wore, finding the gaps in his clothing the way it found the gaps in his understanding. By the time the Thornburg cabin came into view, he could no longer feel his fingers or his toes, and his face had gone numb beneath the scarf wrapped around it. But his eyes still worked. His eyes saw something that made no sense. Elsa Thornburg was standing on the porch, not huddled in a corner, buried under blankets, feeding a fire that couldn't keep up with the cold. Standing on the porch, wearing a wool sweater and no coat, sweeping snow from the wooden planks with a broom as if it were a pleasant autumn morning instead of the deadliest winter in territorial history. She looked up as he approached. Her face showed no surprise, only a kind of patient expectation, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Mr. Caldwell." "Miss Thornburg." He dismounted, his frozen legs nearly giving way beneath him. "How in God's name are you outside without a coat? Would you like to come inside and see?" The outer door opened into the gap. Caldwell stepped through, expecting nothing, prepared for failure. What he felt instead was warmth. Not the desperate, localized warmth of a stove working overtime. Real warmth. Ambient warmth. The kind of warmth that exists when a space has been properly heated and properly insulated. "What temperature is it in here?" "The gap holds between 48 and 52 degrees. Has all week. Outer walls face the cold. Inner walls face this." Elsa pulled a thermometer from her pocket. "Right now it's 51. 51 degrees. In the gap. While outside it was 40 below. Caldwell stood in that 24-inch corridor, surrounded by still air that did not move, that did not conduct, that simply existed as the finest insulation God ever made, and felt his certainty begin to crumble. "May I see the inside?" "Of course." The inner door opened into a living space that should not have been possible. The temperature was 62 degrees. The walls showed no frost. The floor was not frozen. A small fire burned in the stove, a modest affair that Caldwell would have called laughable if he had not been standing in its results. The cabin was empty except for Elsa. "Where is your brother?" Caldwell asked. "At your house since the lawsuit." The words hung between them, heavy with accusation. Caldwell felt the weight of them, felt the wrongness of what he had done settling into his bones alongside the cold he was finally beginning to shake. "How many cords of wood have you burned this week?" he asked, his voice strange in his own ears. "About a quarter cord?" "A quarter cord. I feed the stove 3 times a day. Morning, noon, evening. Small fires." Caldwell did the math involuntarily. He had burned nearly 3 cords in the same period, and his family still shivered. His cabin, built according to every principle he had defended for 35 years, lost heat 4 times faster than this structure that everyone had called insane. "The inner cabin doesn't face 40 below," Elsa continued, her voice calm and measured. "It faces the gap, 51 degrees. I'm heating against a 50-degree differential instead of a 100-degree differential. The gap does the work. The still air does the work, just like my father said it would." Caldwell walked a slow circuit of the room. He touched the walls. He felt the floor. He stood by the window and looked out at a landscape that was killing people, that was killing the valley, that was killing everything except this girl and her brother in their impossible cabin. "I was wrong." The words came out before he could stop them, before he could dress them up in justifications or qualifications or any of the protective language that proud men use to soften the admission of error. "I was completely, utterly wrong. I called your gap useless. I said still air was the same as nothing. I put $10 in a betting pool against you and told everyone who would listen that you were going to freeze." He turned to face her, this 19-year-old orphan who had understood something he had missed for 55 years. "I'm sorry, Miss Thornburg, for the mockery, for the lawsuit, For every word I said that made your life harder. You were right, and I was wrong, and people may have died because I convinced them not to listen to you. Before Elsa could respond, the outer door burst open with a crash. Niels stood in the gap, covered in snow, his lips blue, his whole body shaking so hard he could barely stand. He had run 2 miles through 38 below zero. Niels! Elsa rushed toward him. I'm sorry. The words came out between chattering teeth, between gasps for air, between sobs that he could no longer hold back. I'm sorry I said I hated you. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I... Elsa pulled him into her arms, holding him the way she had held him through the fever, the way their mother used to hold them both. She felt his heart pounding against her chest, felt the ice melting from his hair, felt the particular weight of a brother who had finally come home. I thought you were going to die, Niels whispered into her shoulder. I saw him leave, and I knew he was coming to find your body. And I couldn't. I couldn't let you die thinking I hated you, because I don't. I don't hate you. I never hated you. I know. Elsa held him tighter. I always knew. You're the only family I have left. You're the only one who never gave up on me, even when I was terrible. Even when I said those things. You're my brother. I would never give up on you. I'm sorry, Elsa. I'm so sorry. Shh. It's okay. You're home now. You're home. They held each other in the gap, in that 24 inches of stillness that had saved their lives, while the warmth of the cabin wrapped around them both. Caldwell watched them, 2 orphans clinging to each other in a structure that he had called insane, and felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for a very long time. I'll withdraw the lawsuit, he said quietly. Today. Not when the road's clear. Today. Elsa looked up at him, her brother still in her arms. Thank you. Don't thank me. I should never have filed it in the first place. He moved toward the outer door. I have a lot of people to apologize to, and a lot of things to learn. He paused at the threshold, turning back one final time. Your father must have been an extraordinary man, Miss Thornburg. He was. I wish I had met him. I wish I had listened to you sooner. Caldwell pulled his coat tighter. But I'm listening now, and I'll make sure everyone else listens too. He stepped out into the cold, leaving the Thornburg siblings alone in their impossible, wonderful, life-saving cabin. The cold broke on January 20th. Temperatures climbed slowly back toward something survivable, first to 20 below, then to 10 below, then to single digits that felt almost tropical after what the valley had endured. The survivors emerged from their cabins like people waking from a nightmare. They counted their dead. They counted their firewood. They shared stories of the long nights and the desperate mornings and the moments when they had genuinely believed they might not see spring. And in those conversations, a new story began to circulate. Jasper Caldwell, the former Union Army engineer, the man who had mocked the Thornburg cabin most loudly and most publicly, had visited that cabin during the worst of the cold, had stood in the gap, had felt the impossible warmth, had emerged changed, converted, transformed from skeptic to believer. The girl was right, he told anyone who would listen. The gap works. Still air doesn't conduct heat. Her cabin maintained 60 degrees with a quarter cord of wood while I burned 3 cords and couldn't get above 40. I was wrong. We were all wrong. The betting pool at Prudence Whitfield's store was quietly disbanded. The money was returned. No one wanted a reminder that they had wagered on a child's failure. 7 families visited the Thornburg homestead that week. They stood in the gap. They felt the warmth. They asked questions that Elsa answered patiently, again and again, explaining principles that her father had taught her in an ice house across the ocean and a lifetime ago. By spring, builders from 3 neighboring valleys had made the journey to learn. The court hearing took place on February 15th, as scheduled, though its purpose had changed entirely. Jasper Caldwell appeared as a witness, but not for the side anyone expected. He stood before Judge Harrison and formally withdrew his petition for guardianship. More than that, he testified to Elsa Thornburg's competence, her intelligence, her understanding of construction principles that had eluded trained engineers for generations. "This young woman," he said, his voice carrying through the packed courtroom, "is the most capable builder in the Gallatin Valley. Her cabin survived the worst winter in territorial history while keeping her family warm with a fraction of the fuel that the rest of us required. If anyone in this room is unfit to raise a child, it is not her. It is those of us who were too proud to learn from someone younger and wiser." The judge dismissed the case without deliberation. Outside the courthouse, Niels stood beside his sister, watching the crowd disperse. The same people who had mocked them for months now looked at them differently. Not with respect, exactly. That would come later. But with something closer to curiosity, to recognition. "Are you angry at them?" Niels asked. "For everything they said?" "No." "Why not?" "Because they didn't know any better. They believed what their fathers told them, and their fathers before that. They weren't evil. They were just wrong. Mr. Caldwell tried to take me away from you. And now he's telling everyone that I was right. People can change, Niels. Even people who hurt us. Even people who should have known better." Niels considered this for a long moment. "Is that why you don't hate him?" "I don't hate anyone. Hate takes too much energy. Energy I'd rather spend on building." Orville Hendricks came to the cabin 3 days after the court hearing. He stood outside the outer door for nearly an hour, his breath fogging in the February air, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Elsa watched him through the window, waiting for him to make a decision. Finally, he knocked. She opened the door without speaking. "I blamed you for Marin's death," he said. His voice was rough, unused, the voice of a man who had spent weeks talking to no one but himself. "I stood at her grave and told everyone you killed her. I wanted you to suffer the way I was suffering. I remember. I was wrong." The words came out like they were being pulled from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been locked shut for a long time. "Marin didn't die because of you. She died because of me. Because I built our cabin wrong. Because I listened to men who didn't know what they were talking about, instead of watching what you were doing." He fell to his knees, assouped in the snow, and for the first time since his wife's funeral, he wept. "She came to you because our cabin was cold, 40 degrees near the stove and freezing everywhere else. She knew we were going to run out of wood. She knew we might not survive, and she went looking for help, for firewood, for anything that might save us. Mr. Hendricks, she died trying to save me, and I've spent a month blaming you for it." He looked up at her, his face wet with tears. "The only way I can honor what she died for is to learn how to build homes that don't kill people. Please, teach me. Teach me what your father taught you." Elsa helped him to his feet. She led him into the gap, that 24 inches of still air that had become sacred ground. She showed him what stillness looked like, what insulation felt like, what her father had understood, and what the whole valley was beginning to learn. "I'll teach you," she said, "and then you can teach others. That's how Marin's death means something. That's how any of this means something." Spring came slowly to the Gallatin Valley that year. The snow melted in patches, revealing ground that had been frozen solid for months. Ranchers counted their surviving cattle. Farmers planned their crops. Families began the long process of recovery that follows every hard winter. And in the meadow beside Elsa Thornburg's cabin, a school took shape. It was not a formal school. There were no credentials required, no tuition charged, no certificates issued. It was simply a gathering of people who wanted to learn, taught by a 19-year-old girl who had proved that knowledge matters more than credentials. Gunnar Olsen arrived in late March, hat in hand, shame written across his weathered face. "You came to me last summer," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You asked for help. You talked about your father's ice houses, and I told you to stop embarrassing your people. I remember. I was a fool, and worse than a fool, because I should have known better. I grew up in Sweden. I should have remembered the Stabur, the double-walled storehouses that kept grain stable through winter and summer both. The same principle your father used, the same principle you used here. Why didn't you remember? Because I wanted to be American." He finally looked at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "I spent 15 years trying to forget where I came from, trying to be like everyone else. And in forgetting, I almost let a 19-year-old girl die for using the same knowledge my grandfather took for granted. You didn't almost let me die. I survived. Because you remembered what I chose to forget." He straightened, pulling together the fragments of his dignity. "You didn't embarrass Swedish people, Miss Thornburg. You made us proud, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows it." The techniques spread through the valley like wildfire in dry grass. That summer, 7 families added outer shells to their existing cabins, creating retrofit double-wall systems that captured perhaps half the benefit of purpose-built construction, but still transformed their relationship with cold. By the following winter, 3 new cabins had been built from the ground up using Elsa's design. They consumed a quarter of the firewood that traditional cabins required and maintained temperatures that their neighbors could only dream of. By 1890, the double-wall principle had spread to neighboring valleys. Builders from as far as Helena came to learn from the girl who had proved that nothing, properly arranged, could be worth more than something. The Thornburg cabin itself stood for 61 years. Elsa added a second story in 1894, maintaining the double-shell principle throughout. She married a carpenter named Thomas Eriksson in 1897 and had 3 children who grew up in the warmest house in Montana. Niels studied engineering in Bozeman, then moved to Chicago, then to New York, carrying his sister's knowledge across the continent. He became one of the first architects to incorporate cavity wall insulation into commercial buildings, a pioneer in a field that was only beginning to understand what a Swedish ice house builder had known for generations. The principle they both championed, refined with modern materials but fundamentally identical to Anders Thornburg's 1887 design that Elsa had brought to life, eventually became standard in construction codes across North America and Europe. Double-wide masonry with air gaps, stud walls with insulated cavities, sandwich panels with foam cores creating pockets of motionless air. The physics never changed. Only the vocabulary did. Elsa Thornburg Eriksson was 77 years old. Her hair had gone white, her hands had grown thin, but her eyes still held the same determination that had driven her to build 2 walls when the whole world said 1 was enough. She sat in the cabin that her father's knowledge had built, the same cabin that had sheltered her through the worst winter in Montana history, watching her great-granddaughter explore the gap between the walls. The girl was 7 years old, curious in the way that only children can be curious. She had discovered the corridor of stillness and was walking through it slowly, her small hands touching both surfaces. "Grandma Elsa? Why does our house have 2 walls?" Elsa smiled, remembering a question she had asked once, in an ice house by the sea, when the world was young and her father's voice still echoed in her ears. "Because your great-great-grandfather taught me that sometimes the thing that looks like nothing is worth more than everything surrounding it." "I don't understand." "Come here, sweetheart." The girl climbed into her lap, small and warm and full of the particular light that young things carry. Elsa wrapped her arms around her, feeling the pulse of generations in her bones. "When I was young, everyone told me I was wrong. They said the gap was useless. They said I was crazy to build 2 walls instead of 1. They laughed at me. They tried to take my brother away. They blamed me when someone died. That's mean. Yes, it was mean. But they weren't bad people, mostly. They were just scared. Scared of things they didn't understand. Scared of someone who thought differently than they did." "What did you do?" "I kept building. I kept believing. I kept listening to my father's voice in my memory, even when everyone else's voices were louder. And eventually, winter came and proved that I was right." "And then they believed you?" "Then they believed me. Not because I convinced them with words, but because the cold convinced them with truth." The girl was quiet for a moment, processing this in her 7-year-old way. Then she asked, "Grandma Elsa, what if you had been wrong?" Elsa considered the question. It was a good question, the kind of question that deserved an honest answer. "Then I would have learned something. I would have learned that my father's principle didn't work the way I thought it did. And I would have tried something else. That's what thinking people do. They test their ideas. They accept what the evidence shows. They change their minds when they're wrong." "But you weren't wrong." "No, sweetheart. I wasn't wrong. And because I wasn't wrong, because I kept building even when the whole world tried to stop me, you get to live in a warm house with walls that don't freeze. You get to be comfortable when the wind howls. You get to be safe." "Because of the gap?" "Because of the gap." Elsa kissed the top of her great-granddaughter's head. "Because sometimes the empty space is where all the warmth lives. And sometimes the person who sees what everyone else misses is the one who saves them all." Elsa Thornburg Eriksson died in 1952, peacefully, in the cabin she had built 65 years earlier. Her obituary in the Bozeman newspaper mentioned that she was a pioneer of thermal insulation principles, a mentor to generations of builders, a woman whose stubbornness in the winter of 1887 to 88 had contributed to standards that saved countless lives and millions of dollars in the decades that followed. But the people who had known her remembered something simpler. They remembered the girl who built 2 walls when everyone said 1 was enough. The orphan who kept her brother alive through the deadliest winter in territorial history. The 19-year-old who proved that nothing, properly arranged, could be worth more than something. They remembered the gap, and they built accordingly. Thank you for staying with me through this whole story. If Elsa's journey moved you the way it moved me, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about a time when you believed in something that everyone else said was wrong. Tell me about a time when you had to keep building even when the world tried to stop you. The end.
And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's feeling alone, someone who's being told they're crazy for believing what they believe, please share it with them. Because Elsa's story isn't just about cabins and cold and the physics of still air. It's about the courage to trust what you know is true. It's about the strength to keep going when everyone wants you to stop. It's about the particular kind of love that builds walls to protect the people we care about. That's a story that never goes out of style. That's a story that keeps us warm.